Thanks. My name's Angela Bole, for those of you on the call who might not have been with us a couple of weeks ago. It's been 2 years and 2 weeks, so I understand how that works. I'm the CEO of the Independent Book Publishers Association, and I'm here with our incoming board chair, Karla Olson. Karla is the publisher at Patagonia Books, probably or maybe didn't know that Patagonia, the clothing company, actually has a book department. They publish beautiful books. Karla will tell a little bit about that as we go through this, but she is the publisher there, and she's here to help walk us through this conversation as well. I know there's just a few of us, and if we could get you on video, we would, and we would have more of an informal conversation. We've set something up just to talk about the very high level decisions that need to be made when you're thinking about publishing a book in terms of what business model might be the right business model for you. So again, it's pretty high level. We are recording this conversation, but I'd love to hear from you in the chat as much as you would like to chat. You know, it helps the other people too to see what others are working on and to connect. So let us know in the Zoom chat if you've published, what you've published, how you're thinking about publish. That would be really interesting for us to hear. Let me see if I can, in the technology, figure out how to advance a slide. I did it. There we go. Just to give you a little sense of IBPA, we are a trade association. So the trade that we support in the United States is the independent book publishing trade. Our mission is to lead and serve the independent publishing community through advocacy, education, and tools for success. We are a membership-based association. We've got about 3,500, just over 3,500 members in our association right now. And again, you know, we're banding together to support independent publishing in all of its forms, whether you're a self-published author, your traditional independent press, or your what we call a author subsidized press, meaning the author pays. We're going to talk about all of those all of those business models today. Our vision is a world where every independent publisher has the access, tools, and knowledge needed to professionally engage in all aspects of an inclusive publishing industry. Us being here and kind of working through different organizations like Ureeka is part of our kind of leaning toward that vision, trying to find a place where anyone who wants to have access to publishing or to become published understands the business, has the access, gets the tools, knows what they need to know, and then can professionally engage, be part of the publishing industry. So that's a little about me and our association. Karla, you want to introduce yourself before we jump into the different business models here?
Yeah. So my name is Karla Olson, and I am the publisher at Patagonia. Patagonia has a very select publishing business. We've published 50 books in the last 12 years. We publish about 5 to 8 books a year on the sports that we support, as well as environmental activism, sustainable business issues, those kinds of things. I have been in the business for a long time, over 30 years, and have worked in all different kinds of publishing, all of the different models that Angela is going to speak about. I've worked in traditional publishing. I've worked in hybrid publishing. I've been a consultant. I've worked in what's called book packaging, where you work with someone who develops a project and then sells it to a publisher. And I love this business and think it's sort of fascinating, and that there's a place and a way to get your book done. I also tend to really emphasize professional standards in the business. It is very, very important to uphold those standards to meet the expectations of readers. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as well, I believe. So over to you, Angela.
Great. And you have a fan in Christy in the chat. She's worked in the ski and outdoor business for 30 years, so you can connect. I'll say, you know, we give you a little background on us because we want to be available to you personally outside of these like webinars that we do. So hopefully that helps. And we're in the Ureeka platform. You can message us in our group there, and we can answer questions. We also have a colleague named Christopher Locke who is managing the questions that come through that group. So please know you can know us personally as well as in these sessions. And so let's jump into understanding the best publishing option for you. I think when I'm assuming everybody here has a book that they've written. So you can chat at me and say, no, you assume incorrectly, that's fine. But I'm assuming you've all either written a book or you're thinking about writing a book. And you're thinking then about, well, how will I get this book into the hands of consumers? Because that's basically the business of publishing. One thing to start to think about right at the top is, what is your business model? That just means to me, why are you writing this book? What is the point for you in publishing this book? There's a lot of different reasons why people publish a book, and the reason why you're publishing can often lead you to the right business model for your book. And I'll give you an example. There are some people that publish books that are very mission driven. Really, it's about getting that book out, getting a message out. We have a lot of members in IBPA who are mission driven. That doesn't mean that you don't want to make a profit, and it wouldn't be awesome to you if you brought in a lot of money, but it's not the main goal for the publication of that book. It really is about the message that you want to get out. So you're going to be doing a lot more giving away, if you will, of the content in what you're going to be building, and how you're going to publish might be set up a little differently. So think about that. Maybe the business model of your book is that you're a public speaker and you want to sell books to everyone who comes and hears you speak. You want to use that as a way to get your message out further. Maybe you really do want to be a best-selling sci-fi writer, and that's really what that's your life's goal, and that's what you want to do. So why are you publishing is a really important thing to think about. What is the business behind it? What role does your book play? We'll talk through that a little bit as we walk through. And where do you anticipate receiving the majority of your book sales? So when you're starting to think about publishing a book, where do you see people accessing this book? Where do you see them buying it from, if you will? So we know in the book publishing industry, the majority of book sales happen on Amazon. We can't get around that. So we have to understand that book sales will happen on Amazon. But do you also see this as a book that's going to be in brick and mortar bookstores like Barnes and Nobles? I always get frustrated when people say, put an S on it, like Barnes and Noble, or like any of the independent bookstores. Because if you do see your book on the bookstore shelves, and that's very important to you, then that will help define which business model is the right business model for your book as well. So you'll get a copy of this deck. We'll put it in the I'll just keep calling it the Ureeka group, so you can see these questions further, but those are the questions to ask. I just want to wave hi to Christopher Locke, who's here and joined us.
Good morning.
Good morning, Christopher. He's our self-publishing expert. So again, are you trying to speak to lots of people, sell a book in the back of the room, kind of an author? Is that what you're thinking to do? Do you already have a built-in audience who will buy your book from you once it's published? And you don't need to ramp up a big marketing promotional thing around the book. You're a known entity who's out in the world, and people are interested in getting more content from you besides what you're talking to them about on any number of platforms. Or are you a person who really wants to sit like me in your house, because I'm an introvert, and write a book and put the book out in the world, and you're not really interested in getting out and marketing and doing a bunch of other things with it? You really just want to write. That's where you're at, and that's what you want to do. You don't want to worry about the rest of it. So those are some things to think about. If any of you have thoughts on that, just share them with the group. I think you can, I guess maybe that's just to all panelists. We can work on that for next time. Let us know where you think you are. I'm always curious. So do you see yourself as this writer who's just going to write the content and put it out and let the world do with it? Or are you more of the person that wants to use it as a frame for the rest of your work? Once you kind of start to think about that, you can start looking at your options. This is not complicated, I don't think. So if you're looking at this and you're like, oh, yeah, okay, that makes sense to me, that's fine. The publishing industry, honestly, we've been going through some changes, but we have not changed that much in the hundreds of years that we've been around. So I won't read all of the words on here. I think the biggest thing to understand is that there are really 3 different business models that you can look at when you're thinking about publishing your work. The first is traditional. This is, it's called traditional for a reason. It's how the publishing industry has typically worked. When I say business model, now I'm going to start to talk about, how does the money flow? In a traditional publishing business model, this is what you have expected to see, where a publisher will take on your manuscript. They will pay you what we call an advance, a certain amount of money to kind of set you up so that you don't, quote unquote, so you don't have to work while you finish your book. And then they will pay you royalties on the sale of each book. Sometimes there's no advance. We're going to talk about each one of these 4 different options in more detail, but traditionally you can think about it like that. This is probably what you think about when you think about publishing. They take your book, they pay you money for it as an advance, and then you get royalties on the back end. Now you're going to have to earn out those royalties before you see any money. Earning out the royalties meaning that you're going to have to make as much as they paid you in your advance before you see any money come through. But a big point about this traditional publishing business model is that you don't pay any money as the author to participate in this business model. And you know, in terms of people always ask, well, how much advance can I expect? What kind of royalties can I get if I work in this? I will say it is all over the map, you know, what advances will be. I mean, obviously, well, maybe not obviously, you might not follow publishing news as close as we do, but, you know, we can see advances in the $1 million range for select authors. I do not like that. That's a personal, you know, soapbox that I can get on, but you can see very, very big advances. You can see very small advances. You can see no advance. It really depends on the type of publisher. And in terms of your royalties, you know, we see these traditionally in the 12 to 15% range, but they can be higher, they can be lower. You know, you really just need to look at that when you're talking to the publisher. But again, this is the model where you don't pay any of your out-of-pocket money to publish. Another model is self-publishing. This is completely financed by you, and you are the publisher of the book. You have to take on all of the responsibility for what it means to professionally publish a book, and you have to take on all of the risk, financial risk, in order to publish the book. There are benefits to this. I mean, if we were in a room together, I might ask some of you to name the benefits, so maybe you could think about that in your own heads, since we're not in a room where we can talk to each other right now. But you might like this if you are kind of a control freak a little bit, you know, if you really want to have all of the ability to make the decisions about the book. You know, if you really, really like the details of things, if you want to learn about ISBNs, which are their standard book numbers and barcodes and how to get them right on the book, and you want to control the whole process, there's a lot of people like that. And so this can be very interesting for you as a choice that you make, even with all the options available. Also, I mean, just to be frank and honest, it's very difficult to get a traditional publisher to take you. So maybe it becomes less a choice and more the option that you have, right? So we do know that people will fall into this because they've tried and tried for a traditional publishing contract, couldn't get one, and so they self-publish. There are all kinds of stories about how that goes for people. I'm gonna have Christopher Locke, who's on here, talk a little bit about his self-publishing journey. And sometimes it does lead to traditional contracts, sometimes it doesn't. But essentially, you have to be ready to be the publisher if you're going to self-publish. And finally, over the past, I'd say 5-6 years, the word hybrid publishing has kind of come to the fore in our industry, and you'll start to hear it as you explore your options. It is still a little murky in terms of you know, whether you're going to be working with a hybrid publisher or a service provider. But again, this is a business model where you're working with a publisher, so someone who's going to take on all that business of publishing stuff, who's going to understand what covers work well in what genre, what the price point should be for your book, how, you know, they have it set up in the printing, and distribution is already set up for you, and you're really just working on the manuscript, but you're paying them to do all of that work for you. It's kind of like a publisher for hire, if you will. Whereas in the self-publishing space, you are the publisher and you're figuring all of that out. You're hiring the people independently to do this work. In the hybrid publishing space, you hire one organization. They're theoretically, they're right. You know, every business is good or bad, but they're the professionals that understand how to set it up, and you're paying them for that service. You will get a higher royalty on that paid back to you if you go with a hybrid approach. But that's basically the difference. So let's look at another slide here and then go into some detail. Let's look at this. So I'm looking at the chat, by the way, the questions, in case you guys, anything that I've said just did not make sense at all, let me know. And you can also let us know to speed it up. But this kind of breaks it down as you're thinking about it in terms of the questions that we're asking. So who is the publisher, who pays, who gets the most revenue, and then which business model is the right one for you, depending on what you're doing. I put those little images there to show you that it is often people who really want to control things and who have a platform already. If you already have a ton of people who know about you and who you know will buy your book, that's often a really good indicator that self-publishing or hybrid publishing is the right thing for you. Because you've already built in and done all the work you need to do to sell the copies. Why would you give most of the revenue to a traditional publishing house to sell the copies, to market the book? So that's what those little images are kind of there for. Traditional publishing, the big five, IBPA, we don't work in that space very often, so I won't really say very much about that, except that you generally need an agent. So if you're thinking about traditional publishing with the big five, your first step is to really start researching book agents. And if we want to do a webinar on how that works, we can do that. But I honestly, I used to do the slush pile at Simon & Schuster actually when I was an intern in my 20s, and that is who will read your book if you submit it without an agent, an intern in their early 20s, and it usually will not go anywhere. So you do need an agent. But then there's all of the indies who work in a traditional model, and Karla Olson from Patagonia is one of those. So Karla, I was hoping you could talk a little bit about what it's like to work with an indie press, like Patagonia, or in a general sense. And you know, you're the publisher, you pay all the bills. What do you expect of your authors?
Yeah, so sure, I can talk about that. I mean, Patagonia is, of course, a well-known company, but we're also known for doing things sort of independently and on our own. And the reason that we could have been an imprint of one of the big five, but we have specific goals for the books that we do, and therefore it made more sense to work independently but we have a traditional publishing model. So we pay advances against royalties. I think generally you'll find that most of these traditional but independent publishing companies are smaller. And as Angela said on the previous slide, they're niched. So it's important that you find a company that matches with your manuscript and with your goals for the project, that you are in sync with them, because they're only going to take on usually only going to take on a kind of book that's going to work within the sort of the forum that they play in, or what they're known for. We, for instance, do books on environmental activism, on the sports that we support. I get a lot of, proposals that are, I love the earth, and that's just not specific enough for us, so we turn down a lot of projects for that reason. But we do not all, but most publishers who work in this area do work on an advance against royalties. It's usually oftentimes a smaller advance, but nevertheless, you'll get some money up front. And then are paid royalties based on either the retail price, which Angela mentioned, 12 to 15%, which is the percentage for hardcover usually, and is based on retail price. Some companies also pay a variation of that based on net income that they receive. So that's probably a little bit more detail than you need, but I like to think of working with one of these smaller independent publishers is more like working with a partner. You should have a little bit more input, but nevertheless, the publisher does control the project. So it's more traditional in that way. And you really want to find someone that you're confident that they know what they're doing, that the books that you should look at the books that they've done, and you should relate to them, understand them, like them, because that's the kind of thing you're going to get from them. So, but you may have more input.
We have a question from a panelist. How much content do you need to consider an unknown author?
At an independent, at Patagonia, for instance?
Yes.
Yeah, so we don't do any fiction. We only do nonfiction. So then it is a more traditional, usually what we get is a proposal that outlines the direction of the book, how it's going to be organized, and then usually there's at least one sample chapter, so we can see what the writing is. So it's traditional in that sense.
Very interesting to look up how to submit a proposal. That's very traditional. That's what you would submit to an agent, for example, if you were going to be shooting for a big 5 publisher. Thanks. I want to, there might be some more, Karla, you want to say, but David in the chat had a really good question about Amazon is a must-have, meaning your book needs to be set up on Amazon for people to buy it there. That feels like a 101. And he asked if all 4 of these work with Amazon equally or some are better than others. It is a really important distinction, actually, between, you know, what a publisher does and what they don't do, related to distribution. Distribution meaning getting the book into the hands of the consumer. All of these, now, and remember, self-publishing is you, so if you decide that, that means you will. All of these options will put your book on Amazon and make it available for purchase on Amazon. That's in our industry today, that's like a very easy thing to do. Sounds maybe, but it is. It's basically setting it up and pushing it there. Now, whether or not people are going to be telling people that book is available on Amazon, buying Amazon ads, doing things of that nature, the marketing of the book, that is not always the case. So traditional publishers should be doing that for you. Your hybrid publisher, it depends. You need to really lean in and ask them the tough questions to see how much marketing they're going to do for you. Often they're going to be charging you for each bit of marketing that they'll do. And that can happen in traditional publishing as well. Not that they charge you, but that they just don't do much marketing. So understanding what the marketing is going to look like is important. And of course, as a self-publisher, whatever marketing happens is the marketing that you trigger to happen. So you are the publisher, you're responsible for the marketing. But again, all of these platforms will make your content available for consumers to purchase on Amazon as a default base level thing. I wanted Christopher to talk a little bit about self-publishing and why this works for some people, but was there anything about the indie press, Karla, that you wanted to finish with?
I mean, I think I just really want to emphasize that you need to do your homework in terms of really understanding. If you're going to approach a smaller traditional publisher, you need to really have an understanding of what kind of book they do. And make sure that your book is a good fit. And in your letter to them or your email to them, describe why you're sending it to them. Oftentimes you can look at other books that they've done and connect to something. Keep in mind that every publisher is always looking for the next book to do. We're always putting out new projects. And then think of it more as a partnership. You do need to trust that the publisher knows what they're doing, but you can have possibly more input. And one thing that you need to look into with traditional publishing is, as Angela mentioned, what kind of distribution they have. So the big 5, of course, you know they're going to be in bookstores. You know they're going to be in Amazon. Most traditional publishers also have distribution, but it can be a different business model. So for instance, Patagonia works with a distributor who distributes independent publishers. And we have traditional distribution. That's an important part of our business. But we also sell books in our stores. So you got to make sure that our book is going to work well in our stores as well. So that's kind of an example. We're unusual in that we sell direct through our stores. So it's a matter of really understanding the publisher and looking at the other books that they publish. And really, I can tell you, as someone who acquires titles, I really appreciate it when I know that a book is being pitched to me because someone has done their homework and really understands our publishing business.
Mhm. And there's a good, I think, line to draw there, or I don't know, I'm using the wrong metaphors, but Karla's talking about you as the author, if you're the author here, pitching to her, right, to her as the publisher. And that can happen with independents because they're, you know, a little smaller and they take direct pitches. It, again, doesn't happen with the big five, the traditional publishers. You have to go through that agent, but that agent is doing that job that Karla describes. That agent is saying, okay, you have a text that is a nonfiction political memoir. Okay, I'm going to only send you to these publishers, these imprints of the publishers, because I know that's what they want, right? The agent is serving as a middleman for the larger publisher, but there often isn't that agent middleman. You can go direct to an indie, which can form that partnership that Karla is talking about a little bit more closely. That's why it feels a little bit more like a partnership. You're working more directly with that publisher. And from the beginning onward, yeah.
And do your work too about the agents. The same thing. See what kinds of books they represent, where they've sold those books. Make sure that they are going to be able to pitch. They have relationships with the companies that look like they would be a good publisher for your book. The place to find that, and this is, if you're looking for traditional publishing, start to pay attention to the acknowledgments page in every book, because that's where the author is going to thank their publisher, their agent, their editor, and those are people that you need to really research and understand the kind of work that they're doing.
Awesome. So Christopher Locke is, he's actually our member liaison in the IBPA office and a self-published author. He has 2 books that he has self-published. Yeah, so Christopher, tell us a little bit about that, why you decided to do that, and how it works for you.
Yeah, well, hello, everyone. And the first thing I would say is I really applaud everyone here, because I think one of the most important things is being educated going into the process. And so you all have a leg up on some other people who are writing a book and just go, I'm going to publish it, and they're not really doing their research in advance. So I really think that's great y'all are doing this. So for me, I initially thought I was going to go the traditional publishing route, but then I had finished the manuscript and I talked to other people who were published authors, and they had some things that were more on the negative side that I didn't know going into it, that I thought, well, but they kept saying positive things about self-publishing. So the 2 big things were that the revenue you can make from self-publishing can be higher. Obviously, if your book's successful. And the other one was that, you know, you are more in control of the process. I had some people complain about there were decisions that their publisher made that at the end of the day, they were like, gosh, this is my book, but they get to tell me at the end, like, what the cover looks like and some of the editing of the book. They made choices on the interior, on the content, that the writer was like, well, this doesn't represent me as a writer now. And so I thought, well, gosh, I really genuinely care about this story and I want to be in control of it. So I then decided to go self-publishing, but there were some things that I hope, and this is what we're here today to do, is to prepare people for. The cost was something that was very shocking to me. Going into it, I had no idea, and it would end up costing close to like $8,000 to $10,000. So I would say in advance, definitely start saving up, start thinking in those terms, because for me, money just kept going out. And I, you know, as the time went on, I kept thinking, how much is this going to cost? Like, I'm losing so much money. And if I had known in advance, I wouldn't have been so stressed out about that. And then time was the other thing that was the big stressor. Was the time kept going on, 2 months, 3 months, almost a year. And I kept thinking, is this ever going to get published? And in advance, if I had known that it typically can take a year, I would have been like, cool, this is actually, I'm perfectly on time with this, and I shouldn't be beating myself up. So I think, you know, those are some things to keep in mind right now, because it is going to be stressful, and I don't want you to unnecessarily be stressed out about things that are actually completely reasonable, the cost and the timing. So those were kind of some of the main things. I have so much to say about self-publishing, but I would say the thing that I did enjoy was that I did have control. So the cover, for example, like I got to work with someone. I love that process. She kept showing me, things that she was coming up with, and I'd give her, feedback. I loved at the end of the day that the cover was what I really wanted it to be versus what a publisher told me, here's your cover, and that's it. And then I'm like, oh, okay, that's the cover. So if you really do like to be in charge of all that, then it is a very exciting process to be in charge of all that.
Mm-hmm. I do love that distinction because this chart is meant to, it's super simple chart, right? But it's meant to show you that that is a place where you're in charge and you make all of the decisions. And Christopher's obviously a guy who loves that. You're sitting there maybe thinking, not me, please. I want to sit in my house and write. I don't need to be working on the distribution or the marketing or the design or the setup. I want to actually hire someone to do that for me. And I also want to have an opportunity to be in brick and mortar bookstores. The hard truth is self-publishing is an option that is not exclusively, but very much an online sales option. There is not a lot of self-publishing books that are self-published that get into brick and mortar bookstores and that are sold from the shelves of a bookstore. It's very difficult to get into that sales channel. It can be difficult to get into libraries, but a little bit easier. But I think just know that if you're choosing that self-publishing route, you're kind of boxing out the brick and mortar bookstores. So you're saying, well, I just want to write. I'll let everybody else make the business decisions for me. That's cool. So I need a publisher to do that. I've tapped on all the traditional publishers' doors. I was very specific about my pitch. I made sure I only went to those that published books like I wrote. And nobody took it on still, because there's a million books published. There's a lot of content, 1 million books published every year in our country. There's a lot of people pushing content. So not everything gets through that gate. That's where the hybrid publisher might be interesting to you. You don't want to take on any of the responsibility. You want a publisher who knows the market and can set you up for distribution and sales, who can work with you on the design. You're still going to pay the money for that, but you're going to get more of the revenue back from each sale. So hybrid is kind of a fallback option for people who don't want to take on all the business of self-publishing, can't get a traditional publisher. Maybe they could pay somebody like a publisher for hire to do some of that work for them. You said something else, Christopher, that really triggered for me. Can you just repeat everything you just said again so I can remember?
Yeah, I'm basically a robot, so absolutely.
It was like, I thought it was really important. Maybe it'll come back to me about self-publishing.
Well, yeah, and there was actually one other point I wanted to make is that we called it self-publishing, but this is something so important to keep in mind. Don't do everything yourself. Don't create your own cover. If you wouldn't hire your cover, then you shouldn't do your own, because you want the best people to be working on your book. And that doesn't mean that you're the best at everything, and that's okay. So self-publishing really just means that you're kind of like the person who's in charge of all of it, but you should definitely be hiring people to do copy editing, the cover design, the interior design, like all that stuff. And I think people make the mistake of, they try to do everything on their own. Sometimes it's to save money, and then other times it's because they think they're the greatest at everything. But really, I feel like mostly, other than writing the book, mostly you should be hiring other people to do everything else.
Yeah. There's just a great article that was just published. On the screen, I've written out what a publisher does in basic high-level stuff. So if you decide to self-publish, these are all the things that you need to do or hire someone to do for you. And maybe, Christopher, we can put in the publishing chat on Ureeka, a woman named Jane Friedman just put out a great article of all the questions you should ask a publisher if you want to publish with them. Ask them about their distribution, ask them what they'll do for marketing, ask them all these questions, because if you're working with a publisher, they should be doing all of these things for you. And sometimes it's a bit of the Wild West out there, and they're not doing everything here. But these are the things you'll need to do. And I remembered the thing that you said that I thought was so important. You said time was something you weren't really thinking about. And it's important, if you have a manuscript, if you've finished writing what you want to write, I do think it's going to be think about it in terms of a year at the least before that manuscript is something that a consumer can purchase. Now, if you're working with a traditional publisher, they're going to put you on a 1 to 2 year timeline. Yeah, Karla's like 2 years. Karla signs a manuscript and it doesn't publish for 2 years because all of the things on your screen need to happen to that manuscript before it can be published, including a whole months and months amount of time for the pre-marketing, pre-sales marketing. Yeah,
Let
go
me
for it.
clarify. I get the manuscript. I might sign a manuscript 2 or 3 years ahead of that. It takes the author 2 or 3 years to write it. Then I get it, and it takes about 18 months for us to actually go through the process, upholding the very high standards that Patagonia has to get it to market. And one thing is that I present the manuscript to our book distributor 7 to 9 months in advance of when it actually shows up in the bookstore so that their sales reps can sell it. And that's part of the process. So it's not just the time we're taking to get it to market, but the whole supply chain or the channels also require that to publish well. And you need to give it the time. And then the marketing starts, the marketing starts from the very beginning, but the actual PR and marketing starts 4 to 6 months in advance before, so you're letting reviewers know about the book. So it really is a process that you have to respect in order to publish as well as you can. Now, self-publishing might take a little bit less time, but that is traditional publishing. And that's kind of another reason why some people choose to self-publish. They want their book on the market sooner, and they don't feel they have time to go through the traditional publishing time frame, and so they choose to publish on their own.
Mm-hmm. Right. But I still hope they go through the traditional publishing steps, editing being the most important from my perspective. Before we jump to the next, Christopher, can you answer the question in chat, which is, for self-publishing, what's the best way to get connected with the right talent specialists? How did you find your cover designer? How did you find your editor? How did you find the person who set you up to be sold on Amazon, for example?
Yeah, so there's two things to this. One, I wish I had known about IBPA when I was doing all this, because, for example, like we have our IBPA member services database, which gives you a list of all of our members who do different services. So, and that's free. You even if you're not an IBPA member, you can go on there and you can do a search. So I didn't know about that. Personally, I actually got it through people I knew, and one of which was my wife, who's just very business savvy and very good at networking. And so I would say the more people you know when you start reaching out to, the better. And kind of like Karla said about looking in the acknowledgments, well, I would say start reaching out to people that are authors and writers that you know. And if you liked how their book came out, who did they hire? Who did they get to do the cover and all that kind of stuff? Because word of mouth is like golden. Versus just going on Google and going, who do I get to do my cover design? So those are, it's all about kind of then who you know. But those are kind of two main things. And again, the IBPA, the Services and Discovery Database, is on our website, and you can find people that do website design, all kinds of stuff. So I highly recommend checking that out. In fact, I can remember to put a link in our chat. I'll write a note now.
Okay, that'd be great. We are an association, and I love associations. Associations are your friends when you're starting new processes, I think. So I say that because there is a editors association. I always recommend people go there. They have a directory where you can find editors for hire. There is a printer, something called the Book Manufacturers Institute for printers. You can go and see all the different printers that are available to you. So I'd also say, look at the associations out there. They're going to have resources for you as well. I have these slides, which we kind of already went through, so I will skip down. We talked about the big 5 publishing. You can get a copy. These are bullet points that say, what do they do, what you can expect. Karla talked about everyone else, including the indies. We did mention little, maybe no advance, but you might get a higher royalty, that kind of a thing. One thing that we've we have to acknowledge is this last bullet point. Author does majority of PR and marketing. You know, I'd say Patagonia does a lot of PR. They actually have a PR company that they've hired to do PR on the books that they push out. So it's not the rule, but in a general sense, I think the days are gone when an author can sign a traditional book contract and then just walk away and expect everything will happen for them. The publishers require work on the marketing side of things, help with the marketing. Even in a big 5 world, you can expect to do a lot of PR and marketing for the book.
And oftentimes when you present a project to a traditional publisher, they're looking at your platform because that is someone they're going to sell your books to. So they want to know that you have an established reputation in a particular area of people who know you, know your work, and will buy your book.
Yeah, and that can also become a reason for choosing a business model, which is I feel like I'm going to be very counterintuitive for a second, but I did say that if you have a really great platform, you might want to publish yourself because you already have an audience you can publish into. However, if you don't have a really great platform, you can't really get a traditional publisher to pay much attention. So you might want to publish yourself, even if you don't have a really good platform, because, you know, I mean, I think at that point it becomes about, do you want to do the work of publishing or do you not want to do the work of publishing? When you have a platform, your options expand greatly. So there's always, I would say, advice in, if you want to be an author, what should you be doing? Well, certainly you should be writing, but beyond that, you should be building your platform. You should be building the amount of people you can say follow you, all of that you can imagine platform means, because you're going to be more interesting to a traditional publisher, and you're going to have the option of publishing yourself and making more money with guaranteed sales. So you just have so many more options once you have a platform.
Yeah, and on that note of the platform, I think sometimes people get overwhelmed because there are so many different social media sites, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, all that stuff. So I would say pick the one that you have the most talent for. So if you love taking pictures and making fun captions, okay, well, Instagram is the thing. If you like doing videos that are fun and quick, TikTok. So you don't need to literally have a platform, you know, on every single social media site, but pick one or two where it's really perfectly designed for your skill set. And that way you're doing a good job. Because if you have a Twitter account and you have 2 followers and you never post anything, what was the point of that, right? So don't waste your time and get stressed out that you have to be really great at all of them.
Well, and also pick the ones where your audience is going to show up. So for instance, Patagonia is big on Instagram, although we just shut off all our advertising on Instagram and Facebook. But anyway, TikTok would not work for us, at least not right now. It's much too young. So we'll see where that goes. And also our people don't hang out on Twitter. They don't hang out on Facebook a whole lot. So Instagram is the key for us. And that's where we put most of our energy, as an example. And you can do that work to figure out where your audience shows up.
Yeah, that's really important. You don't have to boil the ocean, as we say. Now on the self-publishing slide here, I just wanted to point out, this is what we were talking about, that third from the bottom bullet point, limited trade distribution options. That is very fancy words just to say you won't be sold in bookstores, right? Trade distribution is what we say the trade is the bookstores and the libraries. They're not consumer. Trade is not consumer. So this is to say, if you're going to self-publish, really think about it being online sales and not brick and mortar or quote trade sales. And then it does say more flexibility for the non-trade sales. That's true. If you're a speaker, you can have lots of options there.
I want to make a couple of points. I mean, I do think that there is some changes going on, especially right now with the result, the way that bookstores are being reimagined a little bit. And I think you might, as a local author, you might get some play in local bookstores. So you're from a particular town, the bookstore would be interested in selling your book, knowing that people who know you are going to come in and buy it, and they're going to want to know that you're pushing people to go to the bookstore to buy it. And that's a possibility, but it's going to be fairly limited. So just keep that in mind.
Good point. Yep. The hyper-local thing we've been talking about it a long time. There are words swirling around Barnes and Noble and their revamp, by the way, that they might become more localized, which would be a great thing for self-published authors. So there can be changes, the rules can change, but yeah, it's a really good point. And then we talked about hybrid as working with a quote publisher who's going to do all the work for you, but you pay and you get more royalty on the back end. So we went through that as well. And every single one of these has that last bullet point, author does majority of PR marketing. So just laying that out there. All right, well, there's 10 minutes left. I don't know if there's any, it'd be interesting. I know we just have a few attendees on, some folks. If you ever found the chat or if you're still with us, to let us know if you're like, okay, I'm going to explore traditional publishing, self-publishing, or hybrid publishing. I'd love to hear that, or any questions you guys have.
I have a question about distribution, just out of curiosity, because you mentioned a lot about distribution in bookstores and traditional bookstores. Are you finding that there might be a movement towards books being distributed in other types of stores where there's like affinity type stores? For example, a design book maybe being sold at a West Elm or a Pottery Barn and getting distribution that way?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
You want me to jump in?
Absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, that is what we call sort of an ancillary or gift market. But you need to have distribution channels into most of those stores. So you need to have a salesperson who's going in. If you walk into your local Anthropologie and you say, well, guess what? My book is blue and it would fit perfectly with these products. They're gonna say, well, we can't buy that from you. Little gift stores in again, the hyper local, sure. Yeah. Try walking in there, and the model is a little bit different. You're mostly going to sell those books on what they call on consignment. So they're going to say, give me $10 and I'll pay you for the ones I sell. Come back in a month. But yeah, books are showing up. The problem with books in those kinds of situations is that they're not a super high margin product. So if the space can be taken up by something that they get a, 75% margin versus 40 or 50% margin, it's a little tough there, but nevertheless, it does happen. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can, from personal experience also, I was running into that problem of the kind of bigger Barnes and Noble places and getting frustrated thinking that I was a failure. But what I did then was I started targeting, my books are about animals. I started targeting stores that were like vegan clothing stores, and they bought them because they were like, this is exactly in line with what we do. And they had a few books on the shelves. And so I was able to sell my books directly to them. And I didn't have like some type of distributor. I just talked to the person who buys their content for their store, and then they bought like 10 copies. So yes, that definitely worked for me. But like Karla was saying, and Angela, like you're like, what's my niche market? And then really target them versus like, cool, my book's going to be sold in every Barnes and Noble in the world. And it's like, whoa, just, hold on. Maybe that's thinking too big.
Thank you. Any other questions in the chat? I think we're good. This was great. We will make this recording available, and we'll email everybody, and we'll also make it available in the book publishing group on Ureeka, so you can look for it there. And of course, Christopher and Angela and Karla are moderating that group. So if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to post in there, and we'll make sure that they are aware that you're asking and they can give you some answers and direction. Thank you so much to the panelists. We appreciate the webinar. It was great. Oh, wait, quick question. Books written in Spanish, are they almost impossible to sell?
No, not at all. It's a growing market, in my opinion. And Patagonia has translated several of our books into Spanish and are selling them into through our stores, and then also into the into the market. There's a bunch of websites too. Again, you have to just do your homework and see where those books are available, and what the process, whether they buy books through a distributor or whether or not they buy books directly.
Thank you. Anyone else? Last call? Oh. Again, any follow-up questions you have, feel free to post them in the book publishing group. I think
Just
that's...
when you work with a publisher, do you retain all rights?
Oh.
Is that what that
Is
says?
that one?
Yeah. Who has the rights? Who has the copyright?
Oh, sorry.
Do you want to talk about that, or who's?
I'll say the author. You know what? I'd be very interested to say this, Karla, and then you can say no. But you know, copyright is can be confusing for some people. But the author always retains the copyright. It's your intellectual property. You are the copyright holder. But it's like you're leasing the ability for another company to format that work, right? So, and I say it like that because you have the copyright to that content. You could tell a publisher, you can publish this in print and ebook, but not the audiobook. I'm going to retain those rights so that I can make the audiobook myself in the way that I want to. Copyright, I think, Karla, you own the copyright as the author until death plus 70 years.
Right, and actually when you step into an agreement with a publisher, generally what happens is you're licensing the work to them for a set amount of time. It's usually 7 years, but then there's automatic renewals. So it can, if the book is selling well, it can sell for a really long time, and everyone's incentivized to do that. And then, yes, you maintain the copyright for until death plus 70 years, at which point the book passes in, unless you've got a foundation or something, the book passes into public domain and then anybody can publish it. But that, you know, it doesn't happen as much as, I mean, there's a bunch of books from the early days that are in public domain.
Yeah. I do want to say that one more time though, because that's where people, I think, you own the copyright, but you're licensing that right to the publisher. So if you license them the rights to the print book,
so what you do is you license the format and you license the territories. So for instance, you can sell world rights in English, which means they can sell it anywhere in the world in English, or you can sell North American rights in English. You can sell foreign rights separately. So we license books to various markets for a language. So we'll sell a publisher in Spain the right to publish in Spanish. And then that usually includes Spain, all of, you know, anywhere in the world, including South America. Although we could say you can only publish in Spanish in Spain, and we're going to license to a publisher in Spanish in South America separately. So it gets kind of confusing, but you know,
you can pick and choose.
Yeah.
And a normal royalty rate for a traditional publisher is between 12 and 15%.
For the hardcover?
To answer Christine's question in the chat.
Right. Hardcover is between 12, it starts usually at 12% going, and then there's benchmarks that are based on the development costs of the book. So usually, like for instance, we pay 12% up to 15%, usually at about 10 or 20,000 copies, because we've earned back the development costs on the project. And at which point we're paying 15%. That's of the retail price. Paperback is 8 to 10%. And then ebooks, we pay 25% of net up to 40% of net based on sale, you know, amount of sales.
Yeah, good to know, because I think that surprises some authors when you say you're only going to get 12% of the retail price back for all the work. But the publisher is also getting paid for all the work they're doing, and that's why it's lower than if you do it yourself. Christopher makes 100% of the sales as a self-published author, as opposed to just 12 to 15.
Kinda. Well, because you know they take out like the cost of printing and you know all that stuff. So like if someone pays $14.95 for a book on Amazon, like I make like $6.50 or something. So, you know, So so you don't get, I'm saying you're not become a millionaire just because you're a self-publisher or whatever. That's my point.
Basically, I guess it's a joke in publishing that says if you want to make $1 million, spend $2 million.
Great. All right. I don't know if we could keep answering the questions, Chris, if you want. Kristen asks, can an author only want paperback? You can only want anything, but the publisher will tell you what they'll take. And sometimes the publisher will say, I'll only take this. And you're like, but I want you to take everything. I don't want to have to worry about anything. And they'll say, well, I'm only interested in this, and this is what I'll pay you for it. And vice versa. So you might want them only paperback, but they might have a way that they could sell hardcover. It's kind of, you have to work with them.
And sometimes the publisher will publish in hardcover and then sell the paperback rights to another publisher.
They'll buy the rights from you as the author, and then check your contracts. You got to make sure, because you can write in there, can they then sell those rights to somebody else, or must they revert back to you? And oftentimes they can sell it to another publisher. In which case,
you're negotiating the percentages on all those things, how you're splitting those. So here's another thing I can say that is really important. If you go with a traditional publisher, make sure, and your agent will negotiate your contract. There are some very good publishing lawyers. I won't say that, but I would say, can I say this? Most general lawyers are just appalled by a publishing contract because there's so much nuance to it. And so agents oftentimes, sometimes they're lawyers, but oftentimes they're not, but they're very good at understanding the market and negotiating those contracts. So that's an important part of what they do.
Great. Thank you. I think we're about out of time. Thank you so much to Angela, Karla, and Christopher. We really appreciate you doing this.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good luck, everyone.